Curious Owl here, and today I am going to be telling you guys all about the books that I read in the month of March. So March was also Emojiathon month, which was a month-long reading challenge where you were trying to essentially meet as many challenges as possible in the time of the month, and it didn't matter how many challenges you completed or what, as long as you participated was the most important thing. And I gotta say, it was kind of cool to do the challenge, but I also didn't feel that I really challenged myself a lot, mostly because this month ended up being a little bit more crazier for me than I had intended, especially during spring break, because I was expecting to be able to read all during spring break, and it did not end up happening because I had a lot of plans that ended up coming up at the last second that I did not prepare for. So there was just a lot that kind of went on that left me unable to read as much as I wanted to, but I am very glad that I was able to read several books this month. So let me tell you guys what ones they were and what challenges they counted for with the Emojiathon. So this month I completed 5 books over the course of March, and I'm very proud of myself because, like I said, this month has been kind of crazy on me. I did DNF one book though, so technically I read through 6, but one of them I ended up DNFing, and if you guys watched my reading vlog from my spring break, you may know what it was, or if you watched my 24-hour readathon for March, you may know what it was, but I will still discuss it just so that you guys know kind of what it was about. So the first book that I finished in March was the first book in the Beautiful Creatures series, Beautiful Creatures by Cami Garcia and Margaret Stohl. As you guys know, after doing the Harry Potter reread, I decided that I wanted to do a Beautiful Creatures reread because this was one of my most favorite fantasy series growing up in high school. It was the first one that really got me interested in fantasy as a true genre, and I really, for some reason, just became so enraptured with the story. I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars, and to kind of give a synopsis of what the book is about, it is about this boy Ethan who has this dream about this girl that he's never met before, but he has some kind of strange connection to. And lo and behold, when he goes into his sophomore year of high school, a new girl comes to school named Lena, who is the exact same girl as he has seen in his dreams. And he starts to realize that there is something strange about her, and there's something very different that is causing her to become an outcast in their small town of Gatlin, South Carolina. But he is so endeared by her and is so drawn to her that he gets put into this entire world that he's never known before. This book was filled with such love and romance, and also really interesting supernatural elements that I think are so well done throughout this series, and is part of the reason why it was one of my favorite series growing up, was I loved the magic system and kind of how it developed over the course of this series. And part of the reason that I wanted to restart the series is because I realized that after finishing the first 4 main novels of the series, that there were spin-offs and novellas and all this other stuff that I had not known about when I had started reading the series in the first place. So I wanted to reread it to be able to give myself the opportunity to read more books in the future. Beautiful Creatures counted for 2 challenges in the Emojiathon. It counted for a freebie spot, and it counted for the challenge of a book that I have started but not yet finished, because I had started the book actually in January, just before the biannual Billionaire, but because the biannual Billionaire had come up, I had to put it aside, and the just did not end up getting back to it until about the end of February going into March. And so it was one of the books that I wanted to really make sure I got done during the beginning of March to try to get through a bunch of other books at the same time. And I just realized I had the book next to me the entire time that I didn't get to hold it up. This is the book. The second book that I finished in March was the book Fragile Like Us by Sarah Bernard, which is, I would consider, a much more darker contemporary because it deals with a lot of very dark topics like child abuse and abuse in general and toxic friendships and things of that nature. And it was actually a really amazing story. I really, really enjoyed it. The beginning was not my favorite at all. I really hated the main character for the longest time in the beginning of this book, but I did end up growing to love her more and more as the story progressed, because there was a lot about the way that she kind of handled this friendship with one of the other characters that I thought was very relatable, and also was something that I think a lot of people don't see a lot in contemporary literature, and especially the way that this friendship kind of builds and then ends up breaking is very, very important to mention, because it's something that is not talked about a lot. You don't hear a lot of stories about toxic friendships, and this one I think was the best portrayal of that I have seen so far, because it's very similar to something that I went to, except my experience was for a completely different reason than the main character's friend was. So to really give a quick synopsis of the story, basically the story surrounds around this girl, Caddy, who has a best friend already named Rosie that she's known her entire life, but Rosie goes to a public school, whereas Caddy goes to a private school in Brighton, England. Then Rosie finds out that there is a new girl in her school named Suzanne, and she starts to befriend her and then brings her to Caddy so that they can meet and hopefully become a trio. But Caddy doesn't really know how she feels about Suzanne. She doesn't feel like they click really that well, and she has a hard time really connecting with the girl. That is until she learns some very interesting information and very dark information about Suzanne and the reason why she came to Brighton in the first place. And from there, it kind of sparks this other friendship with Suzanne that becomes very toxic very quickly, but is not seen by Caddy. She thinks that what she is doing for her friend Suzanne is just things that she would do for anyone else. But in reality, a lot of the things that she does with Suzanne and for Suzanne is very much a toxic kind of problem. I ended up giving this book, I think, 4 out of 5 stars because although I really like the story overall, the beginning was really annoying because you learn a lot about Caddy and kind of her stance in life. Basically, she wants to become this interesting person by having something really disastrous happen to her, which is absolutely ridiculous, and all she's concerned about is losing her virginity at like 16, which is absolutely bonkers, and was one of the things I did not like about this main character is that mostly for personal preferences, I don't understand how someone can just be like, okay, I'm just gonna lose my virginity like this. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in real life. It's usually something a lot different than that. And I don't like the way that it was kind of portrayed for this character because I thought she was very selfish. I just didn't like her as a person, but as the story kind of developed and we got to see more of her interactions with Suzanne, Caddy ended up starting to really grow on me, but definitely first impressions were not the best. Fragile Like Us also counted for 2 challenges as opposed to 1 challenge that I thought it was going to end up counting for, but it was because the next book I'm going to talk about, I decided to DNF. The mental illness category actually was something that I had decided after reading the book because I didn't realize that there was a lot of representation for mental illness in terms of depression, anxiety, abuse, and also a little bit of bipolar, as one of the characters in the story was bipolar. She wasn't really a real well fleshed out character because she was kind of just there. She was just the older sister of Caddy, but it was mentioned that she has bipolar disorder, and there was a little bit of talk about the fact that Suzanne could have possibly had something like bipolar. So the next book that I actually ended up DNFing for March was Hate List by Jennifer Brown, and because of events that had happened in the beginning of March that really messed me up a lot, this was very hard for me to get through as it was very reminiscent of things that had actually happened in the beginning of March. For those of you who may not know, at the beginning of March, right before the beginning of my spring break, there was a shooter that was on campus that essentially didn't harm any students but had shot and killed both of his parents when they were coming to pick him up. It was determined that he actually had consumed drugs the night before and was still working them through his system at the time that he shot his parents, and even at the time they had eventually apprehended him at after 12:30 a.m. the next night that this had happened. So it was very hard for me, and the reason that I think that this book was so hard to get through was because this talks about a girl whose boyfriend shoots up their school, killing 6 individuals and actually hurting her, and it's essentially the aftermath of this in the next school year and kind of having to deal with a lot of the rumors that were spread about her and the fact that she may have been an accomplice in the shooting and other things that had kind of ensued because of the actions that her boyfriend took. So needless to say, this was very, very difficult for me to swallow, and I think I will come back to this at another point in time, but currently it is something that I was not able to read because this was too fresh in my mind, and I just needed to put it down and put it away for another time where I feel I'm actually more comfortable with it. Maybe this will be a summer read for me. I don't quite know. It's going to just depend on whether or not I feel like I should pick it up again, or if not, then I might just give it away because it's just too much. But it's going to just kind of depend on what I think in the future. Hate List was going to count for my mental illness category, but because I was not unable to finish it and then realized that Fragile Like Us had mental illness wrapped within it, I decided to move my mental illness category to Fragile Like Us. I also re-listened to the audiobook for Feel Good 101 by Emma Blackery because I really enjoyed this novel when I first read it the first time in September, and it filled out, I think, 3 categories for me with the Emojiathon, so I was like, this is a win. This is going to be great. I would love to listen to it again. This next book, I realized I left on campus with me because I just finished it this past week, and I don't know why I didn't grab it, but it is Catching Fire, the second novel in the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. I finally finished the second book. I'm so excited because I read the first one all the way back in like the beginning of my channel, and I didn't get to pick up Catching Fire for the longest time, and then I realized that there was a lot of categories that it filled up, and so I was like, this is going to be great, this is going to be perfect for me, I'm just going to dive into this book and see how it turns out, and I was not disappointed in the slightest. This book was actually a 4 out of 5 stars for me because there were some things that I had major problems with in terms of the main character, Katniss, but for those of you who may need a bit of a refresher on the Hunger Games or don't really know what Catching Fire was really about, the Hunger Games is essentially a series by Suzanne Collins that is a dystopian YA series that focuses on this nation of Panem, where they basically will subject 2 children every year from 12 different districts, so 24 people, to fight in this thing called the Hunger Games, which is literally a battle to the death. They do this every single year in order to remind the nation of Panem of what happens when you rebel against the capital, which is kind of how the whole thing started in the first place. In the Hunger Games, we followed Katniss as she had taken her sister Prim's place in the Hunger Games, and also there was another character named Peeta, who was the male tribute for District 12, that the district they live in, and kind of their journey going through training and then going into the Hunger Games themselves. Catching Fire is essentially the aftermath of what happens after the Hunger Games happen, and in the Hunger Games, there's a lot that happens that kind of spills over because Katniss and Peeta have this kind of relationship that was built out of the Hunger Games for survival purposes, and because of the actions that Katniss and Peeta took at the end of the Hunger Games, there is a rebellion that is starting to kind of bubble up in the capital and throughout all the districts that the president is trying to keep under wraps, and essentially threatens Katniss that if she does not play up her fake relationship with Peeta, that her family and those she loves will probably be killed off, and it's a way for him to have control over her, despite the fact that she had no control over the idea that people were going to start a rebellion. And along with that, Katniss is battling with herself because she doesn't seem to love Peeta, but she seems to love Gale, which is a huge problem I had. And then on top of that is the upcoming Quarter Quell, which is the Hunger Games that happens every 25 years. This essentially is a very special Hunger Games where there is some kind of twist involved with the Hunger Games. According to what President Snow reads off a piece of paper that I think is absolute bullcrap because he just wants to get back at Katniss so much, this Hunger Games in fact has the victors of the previous Hunger Games come back, and essentially one male victor and one female victor from each district has to come back and fight to the death again against other victors. And that includes Katniss and Peeta. So they have to go back into the Hunger Games once again for the second time in 2 years and fight to the death and try to survive the Hunger Games in order to continue their lives and also maybe even continue this rebellion that may or may not be happening, that they don't really know what all is about exactly. So there's a lot that kind of goes on in this story because it's kind of the aftermath of what happens after the first book. And my biggest problem is the relationship between Katniss and Gale because I don't think that it is real. I don't think that there is a true relationship between them, especially after the events of the Hunger Games. I really highly doubt that Katniss would have feelings for Gale. And honestly, I think she's just hiding the fact that she has feelings for Peeta because she doesn't want him to get hurt. Catching Fire counted for several categories, one being that it is a book about sports because it is essentially sportsman-like conduct that's going on in the story where they have to train in like archery and hunting and things like that, which is considered sport. It also is a book that has been adapted into a movie, as all 3 books have been adapted into 4 movies with The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, Mockingjay Part 1, and Mockingjay Part 2. This also counted for 2 other categories, but I ended up actually putting in a late addition to my TBR that ended up taking away 2 of the categories that this book was going to fit. So I wanted to make sure that I was evenly splitting up everything. So this one only ended up getting 2 categories filled, but could have filled out 4. The next book that I read was the audiobook for When Dimple Met Rishi by Sanya Menon, which is the most amazing contemporary romance. I cannot believe that I finally actually got to read this because it was one of my most anticipated novels of 2017, and Sanya Menon's next book, From Twinkle with Love, is one of my most anticipated reads for 2018. I'm so excited to read her next book after reading this one because it was so freaking cute through the whole thing. I I loved it so much. You guys can listen to my whole gush about it in my review. But to cut it short, basically, the synopsis deals with two Indian characters, a male named Rishi and a female named Dimple, who come from very different backgrounds, where Dimple is not a very traditional Indian girl where her parents are, and Rishi is all about tradition. He is totally for tradition and loves everything about his traditional Indian culture. But when she's able to go to this event at San Francisco State University called Emojiathon for basically a web development camp, she finds Rishi there, who essentially is only there because his parents and her parents want them to get together and get married at some point. So, needless to say, things don't hit off to a very great start, but the whole story is their developing friendship and eventual relationship that blossoms through the story. It's funny, it's cute, it's cringy at some parts, but it's so adorable and I love it so much. Definitely a book that I want to get as a hard copy later because I want to keep it on my shelf to read in the future because it just warmed my heart so much. I'm a sucker for cute romances, but I don't like super stupid romances, whereas this one was not a stupid one. It was one that I feel developed fairly organically for the most part. Some things I had a bit of problems with here and there, which you can listen to in my review, but for the most part, this novel was actually really well done. I loved learning a lot about the Indian culture and different cultural practices, and even the language that comes from India, because there were a lot of times where phrases or words would be said in Indian throughout the book that you could actually look at and hear and say, and it was just so interesting to see this whole book kind of just have this big influence on Indian culture, and I really hope that From Twinkle with Love does the same thing, because I think it's supposed to be another Indian character that may or may not be in the same timeline as Dimple and Rishi. I don't know. That has to be something I have to ask Sonia. But this book I ended up giving a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The half-point deduction was because of some things that I did not really care for, that I did not feel were super realistic, but I want to kind of hold that off and let you guys go watch the review or read the blog post I have on it so that you can kind of get an idea as to what my thoughts were. But keep in mind that the opinions I had deducting points are completely subjective because it's personal things that I did not like but could easily be something that somebody else likes. So take it all with a grain of salt. The two categories that When Dimple Met Rishi took from the Hunger Games was a book that involves travel, because both the main characters travel from their hometowns to SFSU for this Insomniacon, so I kind of cheated, and that's technically travel, okay? And the second one is a book that everyone has told me about, because this book had positive reviews up and down the wall, and I'm just so excited that I finally got to read it because I finally understand what everyone's been talking about with this book. It's not a super cheesy romance book that typically a lot of contemporary romances can be, especially YA ones. This one was actually very heartwarming and very cute, and I just loved it so much. It was so great. And by the time this video goes out, I will have finished my final book, which was my random TBR pick for the month, separate from the Emojiathon books, which is The Billionaire's Curse by Richard Newsom. In this video, I will only talk about the synopsis as I am currently filming this video. I have not finished it. The day I'm recording this, it is the 30th, so I still have a whole other day to try and finish this, but I did want to get this wrap up out as soon as possible. So obviously, you will see my blog post for it, and I will, in this video, have my rating of it. But to give a quick synopsis of what this story is about, this is what I would consider a middle grade mystery adventure novel in a sense, because this deals with a kid named Gerald who finds out his great aunt Geraldine has passed away, who is extremely rich, like absolutely filthy rich, and she leaves all of her money to Gerald, including a special diamond that has actually been stolen, and so he has to go essentially and find it, and then finds out that there's this mysterious curse that is placed upon, I believe, this diamond, and it's a really interesting adventure story, and I say it's middle grade because it does have a 13-year-old main character, whereas I think that if he was to be somewhere between 16 and 17, it would be considered YA, but I do love a lot of good middle grade novels. I think middle grade definitely has its place in the world, and is a great way for a lot of younger readers to start getting into things like YA and adult literature in the future, so I'm very excited to see how this one is. This was off of my sister's shelf, and she has not read it currently, so I don't know anything about it, but I'm very excited to get through it. I'm about 50 pages in as of today, but I will be finishing this probably tonight or tomorrow. So obviously when this video is being edited, there will be the rating and everything involved for it. So no worries. You guys will get everything later on, but this will be finished in March. I 100% guarantee it. So there you guys go. Those are all the books that I read in the month of March. Let me tell you guys how many pages I actually ended up reading over the course of the month. So total for the month of March, including audiobook minutes, which I convert to about a page a minute just to kind of make it easier on myself as a reader, the total number of pages I've read is 2,763. So that might be kind of give or take, 100 pages or so, only because my audiobook minutes I don't convert in the same way everyone else does. I think in April what I'm going to do is I'm really going to rely on using minutes and making it separate from my pages as opposed to my actual what I've been doing, because in my bullet journal basically what I've done is combined the two of them into pages read, and that may not be exactly accurate. So I think for April what I will do in the future is keeping it separate. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this wrap up for March. I know it's quite long, but that's okay. That sometimes happens, and I'm very excited to see how April will go. April's going to be a very busy month for me though, because I'm coming up on finals in about a month, and I'm getting stuff finished off for carved marks. I should be hopefully hearing from internships fairly soon. I'm hoping and praying, crossing my fingers, because I haven't heard from anyone yet, and I hopefully would need to know if I'm getting an internship a month in advance before I'd have to move out for 10 weeks to New York City, but it just really depends on kind of how things go. But anyway, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!